when I saw him, my mind was just blown. Basically, this guy is just getting started. Hi, I'm Angèle Préto, French learning coach and astrology nerd. Today I am using an ancient astrology technique known as zodiacal releasing to predict the outcome of the 2022 French president election. So we will look at the career forecast for Emmanuel Macron, the current French president, as well as his four main challengers, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Xavier Bertrand, Marine Le Pen, and Éric Zemmour. Now, if you've never heard those names before, don't worry, I will fill you in as we go. A word on the techniques before we start. Zodiacal releasing is a technique that divides the life of a person in three kinds of periods that I will call warm-up periods, peak periods, and cool-down periods. And then within those periods, we'll find shorter periods with the same pattern. This is very useful because it allows us to find out when a person will do their most significant work. And I think we can all agree that becoming the president of one's country is about as significant as a career achievement can get. So, a little word about the French election, although I do have a video which is entirely about the differences between the French election and the American president election, so I'll put it up here. But just for the sake of this video, the election will take part in two rounds. That is really important. So there will be the first round, which will take place on April 10th, 2022, with many candidates. And then there will be a second round where we will vote again to choose between the two candidates that will have had the most votes in the first round. So that round will take place on April 24th, so 2 weeks after the first round. And then the new president will be in office until the month of April in 2027. So they will be elected for 5 years. So let's look at who that could be. First, we will start with Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Now, Jean-Luc Mélenchon is the most leftist of all the people that we will look at right now, and he is currently 70 years old. According to his zodiacal releasing calculations, the peak of his career happened between 1993 and 2007. That was when he was aged from 41 to 56. And that was the time when he was active in the Socialist Party. Later, he founded the so-called Parti de Gauche, so it literally means left party, so a party which is yet to the left of the Socialist Party. And eventually he was a candidate in the election of 2017, but by that time he was not in a peak period anymore, and none of that really panned out. Like, we hear about him often because he's very loud, but concretely not much is happening. Now, currently he is in a warm-up period since 2015 and until 2035. Like, some of those periods are really, really long. And he is in a level 2, so a period within that period, also a warm-up period since the 14th of December 2020. And he will enter a moderate peak period for 8 months on August 2022. So that is quite some time after the election, and that is exactly right after we elect a member of the parliament. So I think he might be a member of parliament, or he might become a member of parliament again at that point. I do not think that he stands a chance of being elected based on this forecast. An interesting thing about him is that in 2033, there is an indication that he will undergo a major transition in his life at the age of 81. And if he is still alive at that time, he might have a moderate peak in his 80s, which would start in 2035, but that would not be as influential as the time that he had in his 40s and 50s. So we can say quite confidently that his career is behind him, and he is probably not our next president. This is also what the polls think, so this is consistent here. Next, we have Xavier Bertrand. Xavier Bertrand is a member of the moderate right-wing party who has been a minister, or if you will, a secretary of state in several right-wing governments under Nicolas Sarkozy. So when I say right-wing, I don't mean the far right, I mean the moderate right. Xavier Bertrand is now 56 years old. He is quite unlucky with the periods because they are just really, really long for him, as you can see on the chart. Currently, he is in a level 1 warm-up period, and his next level 1 peak period will start when he will be 82 years old. So it's a while. He had a 12 years major peak period between 1980 and 1991, which is between the age of 15 and 26. At that time, he was a student, and I didn't find anything significant about him at that time. And most of his political career and government was actually achieved in the cool-down period following that time. So from 1991 to 2018, which is, we can assume that he has been a very successful student, and then he has reaped the reward of the work that he did as a student. And he had this decent outcome of being a member of the government. He has had a level 2 warm-up period, so warm-up period within a warm-up period, between 2018 and 2020, which during that time, in August 2020, he announced that he would be a candidate in 2022. And his next, then he had a major peak that started in November 2020, and will ended in 2021 when he was elected for the second time as the Président du Conseil Régional des Hauts-de-France. And to be honest, that is quite underwhelming after you have been a minister, or if you will, a Secretary of State, after you have been a member of the government, to just be the president of some regional council, not great. Then he will have a cool-down period that started in November 2021 and will last until after the election. Then he'll have another warm-up, and it's overall quite underwhelming. He only has a major peak that starts at age so in 2048 at age 82, so he could have a significant career as a late bloomer if he lives very long, but like I told you, quite underwhelming. Let's move on. Next up, we have a bit more of a celebrity, Marine Le Pen. You might have heard of her. She is the far-right candidate. She is currently 53 years old, and one of the reasons why she's so famous is because she's the daughter of Jean-Marie Le Pen, who founded the party, which is currently known as Rassemblement National and was known as Front National before. She was the main challenger of Emmanuel Macron in the last election in 2017, so that makes her quite important. Fun fact, that occurred exactly during a level 3 major peak period for her, which lasted only 1 month and 20 days. So during that span of time, she was very influential, and then she lost the election, and we didn't hear about her very much as Macron was the new president. What is interesting about her is that her most active period so far happened between the age of 8 and the age of 27, and during that time she had a brief career as a lawyer, and then she started her political career. So currently she's in a level 1 and level 2 warm-up period, and her next level 2 peak period will start on the 24th of May 2022, and that could be a sign that she was either just elected as president in April 2022, although I find that this coincides better with the so-called élection législative, which will be when we will vote for the parliament again. So it's possible that she will be a member of parliament again. She has done that in the past. It's quite frequent for her to have this position. It's not very likely that she will win against Emmanuel Macron, or the polls say that she would lose. So I would not be too... I think it's safe to say that she's much more likely to become a member of parliament than to become the president. One thing that is notable about her is that she will have a level 1 moderate peak period for 20 years again, that starts in 2039, when she will be 71, and that will most likely be the peak of her career because she hasn't had as great a period in her life yet. So maybe she will become very influential at that old age. That would actually be quite similar to what happened to her father, who reached the highest peak of his career when he was at the second round of the 2002 election at the age of 74 against Jacques Chirac. And then he lost. It's kind of the curse of this family that the highest they can go is the second round of the election. Next up, we have Eric Zemmour. Now, Eric Zemmour is a newcomer on the political scene. He is 63 now, but he was never a politician, and I think he still isn't. This man has many French people worried. Like I told you, he's not a politician, but he is a journalist, and he is mostly famous for saying racist things on national TV and for his backwards views about women, which is why a lot of people are worried about him. To be honest, his story is not unlike that of Donald Trump, we all know what happened when Trump decided to run for president in the US. Now, a thing that's interesting about Eric Zemmour is that he had his level 1 major peak period between 2000 and 2014, which is when he was between the age of 41 and 56. And that is the time when his writing career took off, particularly as a journalist in Le Figaro, which is a right-wing newspaper, and by making shocking racist statements on TV starting in 2009. And then around that time, he also published quite a few books, including Le Premier Sexe in 2006, which is a book that's mostly against women, quite misogynistic views that he shares in this book, and then Mélancolie Française in 2010 and Le Suicide Français in 2014, which are books that he speaks about French identity and does a little bit of historical revisionism in those books. After that time, he entered a cool-down period, and there are no more books published by him, and we didn't hear much from him until he became a regular on a TV show called Face à l'Info in 2019. And fun fact, Canal+, which is the TV producer of this show, originally planned to air the show live, and then due to his many racist statements, they decided to not air it live and just rather record it and, check afterwards if they want to air it or not. That's the kind of person we are dealing with. Now, he entered a level 2 warm-up period in 2020, between October 2020 and September 2021. And although he never announced his candidacy officially, he is actually considered by the polls and by the media as a candidate, and he behaves like a candidate more and more during this warm-up period. Now he is in a moderate peak period that will end on the 27th of May 2022, so shortly after the election. My guess is that we will hear from him a lot, so he will be very prominent during that time. Everybody will speak about Eric Zemmour. Everybody will be worried that he will be elected and he will become the French Donald Trump, and that the country will slide back down into some form of obscurantism. And I think we will be very, very worried. But my guess is, because that period ends right after the election, I think that will be very prominent and influential, but he will not be elected. And then he doesn't have a level 1 peak period until 2042, so it would be 83 at that time. And even then, if that does happen, if he lives long enough to have that period and to be still professionally active at that time, still the period would not be as influential as his previous period that was in his 40s and 50s, because it's just a moderate peak. So I am quite confident that his career is behind him, that he will never have more influence than he had when he wrote those books, and that we can put these fears to rest, that we will not have Eric Zemmour as a president, despite the fact that we now have numerous videos on YouTube making fun of this possibility, or fearing this possibility, or explaining why it's very likely that Eric Zemmour will win. No, I am not convinced that he will win based off this astrological forecast. Which leaves us with Emmanuel Macron. Now, Emmanuel Macron, when I saw his zodiacal releasing, my mind was just blown. Basically, this guy is just getting started. He is 43 years old right now, and he is completing his first term as a French president because he was the youngest president to ever be elected at the age of only 39, which is quite impressive. Now, with this fact alone, you'd think that it's safe to assume that he just had his major peak early in life. But no, not even. So he was elected on May the 7th, 2017, and that was during a level 2 moderate peak within a level 1 warm-up period. So now he is currently still in that level 1 warm-up period because it's quite a long period, but he is now in a much better period, a much more influential, much more prominent period than he was the first time that he was elected, as he is in a 30-month major peak that lasts from June 2021 to November 2023. So that alone is a really, really strong sign. Like, no one else on this list has as strong a sign that he will have a more influential part of his career coming up next as he had before. And something that's even more noticeable, on the 19th of March 2024, he starts a 15-year peak period, so level 1 period, not a small period, a long period, 15 years. And that will be the most important of his life, unless he lives to be over 100 years old, when he would start another 30 years peak period. Now, in August 2028, he will have a 30-month major peaks within the 15 years major peak. And that would be after the end of his second mandate, and that would likely be the high peak of his career, together with another major peak that's from May 2033 to December 2033, so a major peak within a major peak. I am completely stunned at the idea that this guy could have had 2 mandates as French president and still have some gas, still have some more, wait, there's more, some more better to come. It's really hard to imagine that he can still do better than being elected president twice. Now, it's not completely impossible that he would somehow decide to skip a mandate and just then have the second one in 2017 during that peak time, but I don't see that happening. Clearly, he's running to be president again. It's also not impossible that he would somehow change the constitution, or that the constitution would somehow change to allow him to be president more than twice, which is currently impossible. So who knows what will happen, 6, 7, 8, 10 years from now. It also doesn't look like he will have a career change, so I'm really, really curious what will happen at that time. I'm just like, I'm so excited to find out what could that possibly correspond to. As you can see, it's very obvious from this technique alone that one candidate, Emmanuel Macron, has a much better forecast than all the other challengers. The polls are also confident that he will win this election, so it's not very surprising to find that out in his zodiacal releasing. I do, however, find it interesting that we can find so much confidence in astrology with the other things that we can use, the other techniques like the polls we can use to predict the outcome of an election. Now, please let me know, do you find this interesting too? Please leave me a comment and let me know if you would like me to look at the astrology of other people or perhaps other elections, especially in French-speaking countries, because hey, that's the topic of this channel. So if there's anyone you'd like me to look into or anything you'd like me to look into, just drop their names below. I would love to make more videos like this if you find them interesting. This is actually my first video ever about astrology. I wasn't planning on doing that, but I became an astrology student about a year ago, and I've spent so much time with astrology, and I find it so fascinating and so useful. It's so mind-blowing, the kind of things that we can do with it. So if that is interesting for you, please let me know, and I would love to make more. Before I leave, I want to give a big shout out to my astrology teachers and mentors, especially Brennan, who taught me this technique, and Maren Altman, who used this technique successfully to predict the outcome of the 2020 US election, which was a bit more exciting and a bit more, there was a bit more drama going on than the fresh election. Although, you know, with Zemmour, I think we're gonna be seeing some drama. But anyway, big shout out to Maren for having used this technique to predict the outcome of an election successfully, and for inspiring me to make this video. That will be all for me today. I will see you in the next one.